What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Get Paid for Your Pad. My guest today is Mike Stenhouse. He is the co-founder, together with his wife, of the Inside Property Investing podcast, a very popular podcast about property investing. And we are going to talk about the differences between long-term rentals, short-term rentals, and we're also going to talk about leaving the corporate world to go 100% into property investing, because that's what Mike has done. And we might even talk a little bit about sailing around the world as well. So, Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Jasper. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have a fellow podcast host on the show. I was on your show. I saw it just got published. So if anybody wants to check that out, go to insidepropertyinvesting.com, and there you can find the episode that Mike and I did earlier for his podcast. But today, let's talk about short-term rentals mainly. But before we dive into that, why don't you give us a quick background of your story, and why did you get into property investing? Why did you get into short-term rental as well?
Sure. So, I mean, we've been investing for a long time. I'm kind of mid to late 30s now. I bought my first investment when I was 18. There were no big plans there. Didn't do anything for a number of years after that. Went to university, graduated, got a job with Procter & Gamble on their grad scheme. It was a good gig. They paid well. I was young, didn't have any responsibilities. It was nice. It was a fairly easy time, but I kind of had something niggling me that I wanted to do. I wanted to do more. I'd always kind of played with businesses growing up, so I kind of I figured there was something beyond the corporate world for me, and property just had this draw. In the UK, growing up, watched a lot of the kind of renovation shows and that sort of stuff. So I had this one rental. I decided when I moved to Newcastle for my grad job that I would buy a place rather than rent something. And I lived in this renovation project for a while, did a lot of the work myself, and lived in amongst the contractors doing the rest of the work. That's always fun, right? Living on a building site is a unique experience, not something you really want to do too many times, but it's good fun. And gradually just kind of got into house flipping alongside the day job for a number of years, and realized that I was kind of making more money from that than the day job. But it's lumpy, right? You flip houses, you sell one, and you make some money, but then you kind of need to get back to work again. So gradually moved into the rental space, buying up some long-term rentals, left my job, and we've been focusing on that. I've been full-time in property for 12 plus years now. I made the jump first. My wife stayed in the corporate world to kind of support us short term and keep us mortgageable. And then about 3 years after I left, she was able to leave as well. And that's been our business ever since, alongside the podcast as well, kind of talking about what we do and having fun interviewing other people as well.
Talk to me a little bit more about the transition from corporate to leaving the corporate world. Essentially, I know there's a lot of people listening to this podcast who want to do that, and it's a bit of a scary move to make, right?
For sure.
How did you describe that process? Did you save up a lot of money before you felt comfortable doing that, or
No.
what was your emotional state throughout the process?
Definitely not. I mean, like I say, I probably did it at the right time. For me, I was young, no kids to worry about, nothing, no crazy fixed expenses that I needed to worry about. So when we decided that was what we were gonna do, I was fortunate that Victoria, she was in a good job as well. Her income could support both of us. So we knew that we had this runway where I could go and focus on that full time, build up the property business, and then get to the stage where we could replace her income that way. So it was the right way for us to do it at that time. With hindsight, I think we hear a lot people saying desperate to leave the day job, I want to be a full-time investor. I don't think the scale that most people operate their investing business at is necessarily a full-time gig. I think you can make a lot of progress while still working a job. And that job security gives you an income so that you don't need to be spending your rental profits. You can reinvest them. It keeps you mortgageable, right? Like if you've got a day job, like a salaried income, I think lenders typically like that as well. So yeah, I jumped quickly. I think, if you can extend that runway a little bit, like if you don't hate your job and you're okay to hang it out for a couple of years and work hard and get to a place where, you can build up your income first, then I think that makes more sense. But for me, I jumped and then kind of figured it out as I went, because I'm a bit impulsive like that, I guess.
Right on. And so, first you went into flipping, then you went to long-term rentals, and then when did you start looking into short-term rentals?
So we've had our first short-term rentals for probably 5 years now, I guess, round about that amount of time. It was something that, I don't know if you find this, one of the downsides of being a podcast host is, like, you kind of want to experience different things so that you can talk about them. And I heard everyone talking about, like, we had our long-term portfolio, it was doing well. Everyone's talking about coming on the podcast saying, oh, service accommodation, short-term rentals, they're great, the profit's great, yada yada yada. And I was kind of, I bought into the hype. So I was like, well, one of our next deals, if it's suitable, we'll consider it. And I had a couple of things in my head that were going on. I think I wanted to do something that if it didn't work out, it could switch back easily to a longer term rental. And I think most short term rentals are good, right? But like, I didn't want to go and buy something in like a pure holiday like vacation destination. I wanted something that there would be demand for long term if we wanted to switch it back. And the project that we did, it was 2 apartments above a retail unit, so like a shop on the ground floor and then 2 apartments above it. I didn't want to have like one short-term rental in a building with other long-term rentals. I knew if we were doing it in a block, I'd want the whole block to be short-term or long-term. So this project came up 5 years ago. It was 2 apartments, a 2-bedroom and a 1-bedroom. The location I wasn't sure about. It's not a tourist place at all where we live and where we invest. But, I hear people talking about like corporate bookings, and we've ended up having a lot of people with friends and family visiting them. They'll stay in our apartment versus stay with whoever they're visiting, or people who are maybe getting some renovation work done on their own home. So like the tourist thing was a concern at the back of my mind. It hasn't really been an issue since then, but it was a case of, we want to diversify our portfolio a little bit. The income potential looks really strong, and actually the risk, the downside is pretty low if we don't like the short-term rental business. If the market isn't there, like we'll rent them out long term, and there's kind of like the downside, what I mean, like the downside just didn't really feel like it was a big risk for that potential upside.
Yeah, makes sense. And how did it go? Like, are you still renting those homes as a short-term rental, or did you switch it back?
No, they're still there. They've been short-term since day one. We've added 2 more short-term rentals to the portfolio as well, so not massive by any stretch. But they do well. I think the seasonality of it still makes me a little bit nervous. Like January, we probably had our quietest January on record this last month. And that's kind of nerve-wracking. Like overall, they do well. We sit at probably 70 to 75% occupancy throughout the year. And at that level, we make a good amount of money on them. But those slow months, you feel it, right? And it's that roller coaster that is probably one of my biggest negatives about the short-term market as a strategy. Our long-term rentals, slow and steady, they just sit there month in, month out. It's the same. The short-term market, it takes a bit more managing and effort to create a business there. It's not just something you can certainly I haven't found that you can set and forget.
Oh no, not anymore anyway. Let's talk a little bit more about the pros and cons of like long term versus short term. You mentioned the seasonality, obviously. I think you're not the only one who had a very slow January.
Okay, good.
I think
that's reassuring.
Like this, most markets that I'm involved with have seen like a pretty slow January, February.
Okay.
But then the pacing for the summer is looking pretty good in most markets. So like, 2024 could still be a good year.
Good.
But
Okay.
you touched on the seasonality. What are some other pros and cons that you see between long-term rentals and short-term rentals?
I mean, the biggest pro has to be the income, right? Versus the kind of long-term market. If you get it right, and I think that what has worked quite well for us is having kind of lower value, smaller units. It feels like it's a great way to really kind of enhance the income potential of that. I don't really get into like the political debates about Airbnb hollowing out communities or anything like that. I just our approach thankfully has been in both cases we converted. So I say in both cases we have 2 apartments in one building and we have 2 apartments in the other building. That's the 4 short-term rentals that we have. Both of those were conversions from commercial buildings into residential apartments. So in terms of like the argument about taking homes away from longer term rentals or kind of year-round residents, we've created new housing that we've turned into short-term rentals. So that kind of I don't know how most people feel about that side of the argument, but for us it hasn't really been something that we've had any kind of negativity from the community. But yeah, the income potential is great. That has to be the biggest upside. And it's difficult to ignore that. The downsides, and I think the reality of a short-term rental business is that it is much more of a business than a longer-term investment portfolio. You could put a tenant into a long-term property and maybe you get the occasional maintenance issue. More often than not, they pay their rent on time. Like we can go for years without really hearing from them. Short term, it's like, every couple of days you've got, are the cleaners going to show up today? Are my guests going to show up? Are my guests going to look after the place? Or are they going to trash it? Are they going to get there and, the bedding isn't as clean as we would hope, or, there's something missing in the bathroom or the kitchen, or like, it's just so much more involved than the long-term rental market. And I think going into it, we didn't really appreciate what that looked like. We've got better at it, and we're still learning. We're still kind of, it's not what we focus on, right? So it's not what I specialize in at all. So I'm always kind of looking for ideas to make it easier. It has improved, but it still feels like much more work for that reward. It's not passive by any stretch.
Right. And so, I mean, you're talking about the higher profits, right? Like, do you feel like the extra income is worth it given the additional work that you're putting in?
I mean, I feel like on a short-term rental podcast, I kind of need to say yes. The reality is in January, I was nervous, right? Like I was, honestly, there are times when I think, okay, yeah, the income is better. Obviously our gross revenue is great, but then we have all of our costs, our housekeeping and our laundry and, you pay your commissions and all that sort of stuff. Like the net difference probably isn't as big as it looks when you hear the kind of top line numbers. It's still enough to make it worthwhile. But when you have a month like January and then you're thinking, geez, if this continues, then we're gonna, yeah, it's not the most appealing. Like for the work that we do you really get that additional gain? I toy with that regularly. Like I think we're at the stage where with the short-term rental side of the portfolio, we either want to scale it and get to like probably like a minimum of maybe 10 units where we can have more robust systems in place, because we manage internally as well. We don't have an agent, so we do that in-house. So either get up to that stage where we can invest a little bit more in like a support team and maybe a bit more robust like cleaning processes. And there's some great apps out there that we can use to do that. But I just don't feel like we can really justify that at the moment. Or, we go back to just the kind of long-term rental market. It's a question that I can continue to battle with. I'm not about to pull the plug on them immediately, but it's either we need to find a deal relatively soon that gets us an extra few units and we continue to scale that, or we back out entirely. For me, it's not something that you do with like one or two alongside another business. It's either your focus or it's not.
Mm-hmm. Do you see any advantages with the flexibility that short-term rental gives you, where if you have some family members over, you could block out the calendar and have them
For
stay
sure.
there versus a long-term rental, you don't
Yeah.
have any control over it.
Yeah, and that's been great, right? Like we live, so I live probably like 3-4 hours away from where I was born. My family still live there, so if they come to visit, we've got young kids now, so it's nice to have somewhere to put them up. You mentioned as well, maybe we'll talk about our traveling. We would come back to the UK for winter, and to know that we had a place for 3 months of the year, that was awesome. So that if you are looking for that kind of lifestyle, something that fits in with more travel. We have friends that, they'll go away in their RV or their camper van and they keep a place in the UK that they Airbnb. Then it can be, I suppose that's a different argument to we're doing this purely for profit. There's an additional benefit there. And that exists 100%. If that would like add value to your life, then it's definitely a really strong consideration.
Yeah, for sure. Have you ever had any issues with your tenants? Because like this, another reason that some people go into short-term rentals is because if you have a bad experience with a tenant one time who stops paying rent, and then you can't just say like, hey, if you're not paying rent, you got to leave. Like there's also you got to get into
So you mean
like
with like
court
our
cases
longer
and
term tenants versus the short term ones?
yeah, exactly, yeah.
We've had, I mean, I think the rental market generally gets a lot of bad press, and I think of course there are horror stories, right? And everyone has probably had a few issues, but like on the whole, I think that the rental business is a lot more straightforward than most people make it out to be. We've been doing this for full time for 12 years, part time longer than that. We have had a lot of our houses, we have like shared houses. So we have maybe like a 6-bedroom home that we'll rent out to 6 individual professionals. So we've had like a lot of tenants in that period of time. We've got a lot of property. As I say, we manage our properties in house as well. So we're kind of really like at the coalface to see what's going on. And like tenant issues just isn't something that causes us much of a problem. I think we have a responsibility to create a nice place for people to live. So I see a lot of people moaning, oh, my tenant, the boiler keeps breaking. Like, I'm like, well, fix the damn boiler. Like, if they're complaining about something on repeat, like, oh, the windows are really like drafty. I'm like, okay, well, put new windows in. Like, I think we have a responsibility. If we're providing housing, we should provide a good quality of housing. And I think if we do that, and you vet your tenants, you reference them, you take a deposit or a guarantee, like, in the main, we've had such few issues that like stand out in my mind as like real kind of headache moments that it's just not something, it's not part of the business that stresses me out at all.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, it's always the horror stories that get the most press, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's the case in the long-term rentals market. That's the case in the short-term rental market
Exactly,
as well.
right.
'Cause,
I think running away from that, like, oh, there could be problems in the long-term rental sector, to short term, like, I mean, we've, again, very few compared to you hear like mainstream press talk about like these parties. And like we had, I think the worst, and it wasn't even that bad, but like the worst story that we have to tell was we had 3 female prostitutes that ended up in one of our apartments, and we found out about that. There were people showing up there every like 30 minutes. I mean, these ladies were busy, so they had a good business going there. But obviously, it wasn't what we wanted from a reputation point of view from our neighbors. We went around, we had a conversation with them. They left pretty willingly. So, like, I mean, we've had a couple of noise complaints in 5 years. Again, probably like a handful. We've had a few things damaged, but I think that's part of the business, right? Like it's you accept that these things might happen. Hopefully, they don't happen to you too often, and things can go really bad. But touch wood, so far we've been pretty lucky.
Mm-hmm. So you touched on the short-term rentals giving you flexibility to live part-time at an apartment and then go travel around. Now I know the winter is a slower season for you, so I guess it makes sense to stay there in the winter and then go traveling in the when the demand is higher. You I saw on your website that you actually lived on a boat.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, we we decided we wanted to go traveling. And you know what? A lot of this was, so you mentioned you were on our podcast. It went live yesterday, but we spoke to you first, like 6 or 7 years ago, right? And your original situation at the time, really inspiring. I mentioned, I think maybe before we started recording, it was probably one of our most talked about podcasts ever, right? Everyone's like, oh yeah, who's that Dutch guy again? What's he doing? Like his story is really cool. And like, so travel had always been something that we wanted to do. We heard stories like yours and that inspired us. I mentioned, like property. I don't feel like it's a full-time business. We've got a great team on the ground. We've built up, some systems and processes that mean that, like, I found that we were doing 90% of our work on a laptop. So although we were investing close to home, it wasn't like I was on site every day. I wasn't running around like with keys or like it was basically a laptop job. So um we said, well, again, we've got no responsibilities really. We want to go traveling. Let's maybe go on some, rather than just go on vacation, let's go and do something fun for a couple of years, and then we'll come back and settle down and have kids. A couple of things that played into that. We wanted, we have 2 dogs, so they had to come with us. We wanted a little bit of comfort. Anyway, we got into sailing. My wife's been sailing since she was a kid, but kind of fell out of love with it. But we went. She sailed in Wales. Wales is like the wettest part of the UK. Sailing in rain, bad weather, not really fun. Sailing in the sunshine, much more fun. So we went out to Europe, to the Med. We did some sailing around there. We came across some YouTube channels of people who were living on boats and thought, yeah, that sounds awesome. So within the space of about 12 months, we had this idea, let's go traveling. And we did our qualifications, we bought a boat. We kind of ramped up our team a little bit so that we had people on the ground back in the UK. And the plan was to go sailing around the world. COVID hit, so we actually didn't leave Europe in the end. We did 4 years sailing around the Mediterranean. We came back for a couple of months each winter. And then in the last year, Victoria gave birth to our daughter. We did a summer on the boat with her when she was a baby, but by the end of that season, she was starting to move around a little bit. And we thought, yeah, if we come back next year, she's going to be like jumping off the boat. And we weren't ready for that level of drama in our lives. So at that point, we sold. We moved back to the UK about 12 months ago. And we had a lot of fun. We continued to build the business and focus on that. And yeah.
You were still able to record podcasts while you were on the boat? Did you have good internet?
I mean, so running a business from a boat sounds awesome. It was awesome at times, but there were also, like, just living life on a boat takes a little bit of effort in terms of like your weather planning, your route planning. What you think is going to happen is rarely what actually happens. We also had friends and family that wanted to come visit us. So whilst we were trying to work, everyone else who was with us was on vacation and wanted to have fun. And we wanted to have fun as well. So yeah, we were able to run the business. We would typically, try to schedule it so that we'd spend a night or two each week in a marina close to a town or a city, so we could like connect to the Wi-Fi, and we'd go and do the grocery shopping and that sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean, it had some challenges, but absolutely worth it. Like, you figure these things out. Again, one of the things that you spoke about when you were in, I think, Chiang Mai, right? You were like, that was set up for nomads. It had like the best Wi-Fi you'd ever had, and it wasn't quite that good on the boat. Starlink was, just an idea. I think, it's really now just becoming popular, and a lot of people are relying on that. So, it's one less thing to worry about, but you make it work. We were able to record podcasts. I switched to more solo episodes to kind of try and get around that a little bit, but yeah, it was good fun.
Right on. Any big challenges while you were living on the boat, like storms or like, boat falling over?
We had a few. Thankfully, nobody falling overboard. We had a couple of big storms. We were super naive that first season. We'd look at we had radar on the boat for weather. I didn't figure out how to use that until we'd been on the boat for about 12 months. We'd been through a couple of big storms, and somebody who we were sailing with for a while said, "Well, didn't you see it on your radar?" And what the heck is radar? I didn't know. So Yeah, we had a couple of big storms. We lost our dinghy, our tender. I mean, nothing dramatic. We survived. We're still here. It was still a good experience. I think honestly, the biggest drama or concern was just trying to fit in too much. Like we wanted to have this adventure and be on vacation and be present and enjoy where we were. At the same time, like living and managing a boat was a new job effectively. My wife was like the skipper, so she her day was full of like passage planning and looking at the weather when we figured out how to turn the radar on. Things break on boats, so I became like part-time engineer. And then we're also trying to run the business. We're trying to grow the business. Our business, it probably we sustained it. I wouldn't say it was like phenomenal growth. So I was kind of excited by the time we were coming back to like enter a new phase of like let's push this and see where we can get it to. So it took more time. It was more time consuming living on a boat and trying to balance everything than I thought it would be. But yeah, still an awesome experience.
Mm-hmm. I saw on your website that you help people with something that's called HMO
Yeah,
investing.
yeah.
Can you
I
explain what that is?
I think it's like a UK specific industry or strategy. So it's what I mentioned where um, the best way, and I don't know if there's an equivalent of this in the Netherlands, but it's whenever I'm speaking to anyone in the US, I tend to describe it as like a frat house for professionals, like young professionals, graduates. So effectively, we will take a single family home, or in our case, we often take kind of larger like commercial offices and things like that, and we'll convert them into maybe 6 or 8 or 10 bedroom HMOs, which stands for a house of multiple occupancy. So rather than renting out the entire property to a single family, we would rent out each individual bedroom, and then there's going to be shared communal spaces. So they have a kitchen and a lounge. Often in the larger houses, they'll have a couple of different lounge spaces, dining rooms. So it's it's a nice place for people to live. It's kind of like student living post graduation, and it's not dissimilar from the short term rental market in as much as the rent is like all inclusive. So you pay for a nightly rate on Airbnb, and that includes all of your utility costs, and you've got cleaning and all that sort of stuff. They move into our house, all of the utilities are covered. We pay for the electric and the water and the Wi-Fi, TV and cable. We pay a cleaner to go into that house every week. So it's kind of like a convenient, lower cost, but also kind of fun and sociable way for typically young professionals, people in their, mid 20s up to early 30s, is who our usual demographic is.
Mm-hmm. Do these people sign a lease for the room, and do they typically stay for a longer time, or is it more like almost like a midterm, like a 1-2 month thing?
No, it's definitely longer term. I mean, when we started, we would have like a 6 month lease agreement in place. Now, it's 12 months. I mean, we'll still do 6 if somebody like was really adamant that that's all they need it for. But typically 12 months. The market here is crazy for room rentals. I think there's something similar in Australia. I mean, models like this exist. I don't know what they're called elsewhere, but yeah, so typically kind of 12 months. Like our longer term family homes, people will be in there for years. I would say our average tenancy length in an HMO is probably about, somewhere between 12 and 18 months. So it's
Mm-hmm.
still, it's a reasonably long term solution. Often we find people are moving here for the first time. So we live in Manchester. They've maybe got a graduate job here. They're moving here. They've been to university. They're moving here for work, and maybe they don't want to buy. They can't afford to buy. They don't want to live on their own. So this is, it's a kind of nice interim solution for them. And then they'll get familiar with the location. Maybe they fall in love. Maybe they buy their own place, and then they'll move out into an apartment or a house. But yeah, it's a good kind of entry level route for people who are relocating or looking to kind of move out of their family home for the first time.
Right. Last question: Manchester United or Manchester City?
Well, see, I am from Scotland originally, so I have no allegiance to any Manchester team. I'm not even gonna take sides, because if I pick the wrong side and anyone listens to this, I'll end up in trouble. We have like our contractors on site. We do a lot of renovations and construction work, and like there's a big allegiance to one or the other, so it causes a little bit of rivalry. If I had to pick, like, are you a big follower of football or soccer? I guess I need to call it, but like, do you follow the English Premier League or?
I do, yeah, I
Okay,
do.
so if I had to pick, I would say I was a Norwich fan. Norwich are, not the most exciting team in the world, but yeah, that's the team that I chose to follow a few years back. But for me, football is not the right sport.
Gotcha. Okay, Mike, before I let you go, let people know where they can find you. I know you have your podcast at the insidepropertyinvesting.com.
Yeah.
Who's this for, and like, what can people learn from your
Sure.
podcast?
So, I mean, our focus is the UK market. So we talk about all different strategies within the UK, whether it's short-term rentals, HMOs, single lets, or commercial property. But it's predominantly focused on the UK market, and it's mainly interview based. We speak to a lot of cool people like yourself who've got tons of experience. We speak to a lot of people who have maybe just done their first deal and can share some lessons on what worked for them. So it's for aspiring investors who are interested in the UK market, maybe want to find out a bit more about how to get started or which strategy is right for them.
Gotcha. Awesome, Mike. Well, appreciate you jumping on, and excited to keep following your journey. I'm excited to hear in the future if you're continuing to do those short-term rentals, or if you're eventually gonna, if the roller coaster of seasonality is a little too much, and you're gonna go back to the safety of the long-term rental, if you will. And I appreciate you jumping on and sharing your story.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And to the listeners, hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll be back soon with another one. See you next time.